The bodies hung where the wind could work on them, not buried, not hidden, suspended in iron cages along the Kent coast, high enough that sailors could see them from the water, close enough that villagers could smell them when the breeze turned inland. This was England in 1749. The men had been hanged weeks earlier, rope, scaffold, the usual machinery of justice. But the state was not finished with them. Their corpses were wrapped in chains, hoisted onto posts, and left to weather. Gibbeting, they called it, hung in chains, sometimes in iron frames shaped like the body, a warning made flesh. These were smugglers, members of the Hawkhurst Gang, an organization that had controlled the Sussex and Kent coasts for nearly a decade. They moved contraband on a scale that embarrassed legitimate trade. They employed networks of porters, lookouts, and armed enforcers. They intimidated witnesses, bribed officials, and when necessary, they killed. For years, the authorities tried to contain them. Revenue officers raided, magistrates issued warrants. Nothing held. Then, in 1748, two men disappeared. A customs officer and a shoemaker traveling to give testimony. They were intercepted, tortured, and murdered. One was thrown down a well. The other was put into a grave and covered over. The murders were brutal, but they were also careless. Witnesses came forward, trials followed, verdicts came swiftly. And when the executions were done, the state made a decision. The bodies would hang in cages along the roads and coastlines where the gang had once ruled until the bones fell out. What kind of crime makes a state do that? By the way, if buried atrocities and the records they left behind are the history you come here for, subscribe. This is what we do in the darkest archives. To understand why, you have to understand the coast. The south of England in the 1740s was not lawless, but it was contested. High import duties made tea, brandy, and tobacco extraordinarily profitable to smuggle. A chest of tea bought in France for a few shillings could sell in London for several pounds. The margins were staggering. The coastline was long and difficult to patrol. Coastal villages were economically pressured. Fishing was unreliable. Farming was marginal. Smuggling paid better, and it paid in cash. Entire communities participated, some actively, others through silent complicity. Into this economy stepped the Hawkhurst Gang. They were not petty criminals. They operated with discipline and scale. According to contemporary accounts, they could land hundreds of tubs in a single night and move cargo inland before dawn. They used coded signals, lanterns on cliffs, church bells at irregular hours. They maintained safe houses and bribed customs officials. And they were armed. When revenue officers seized a shipment, the gang would raid the customs warehouse and take it back. They moved in groups large enough to intimidate entire towns. This was not crime in the margins. This was war on home soil. The authorities knew the names, but knowing names and securing convictions were different matters. Witnesses feared reprisal. Juries were sympathetic or terrified. Magistrates lacked resources to protect informants. For nearly a decade, the gang operated with near impunity. But violence has limits, and in 1748 the gang crossed one. February 1748, two men were traveling to Chichester to give evidence before a magistrate. Daniel Chater was a customs officer. He had witnessed a smuggling operation and agreed to testify. William Galley was a shoemaker, hired to escort him safely to the courthouse. They stopped at an inn. According to a later trial testimony, they were recognized. Word spread quickly. Members of the gang intercepted them on the road. What followed was not a robbery. It was punishment. The two men were taken to a barn. They were beaten. Galley was tied to a horse, face down, and whipped. The gang dragged him across fields until his body gave out. He died that night from his injuries. His corpse was thrown down a well. Chater survived longer. He was held for days, tortured for information about other potential witnesses. Then he was forced into a grave and covered with earth. The murders were not impulsive. They were calculated. A message to anyone who considered cooperating with authorities: this is what testimony costs. But the gang miscalculated. The disappearances were noticed immediately. Families pressed magistrates. Magistrates pressed the Crown. And for the first time, the full machinery of state investigation turned towards the Hawkhurst Gang. The response was methodical. Substantial rewards were offered, enough to fracture loyalty within the gang. Informants came forward. Some were former members who saw an opportunity to save themselves. Others were villagers who had harbored the gang out of fear, not affiliation. One witness described the abduction in detail: how Galley was whipped until he could no longer speak, how Chater begged for his life before the earth was thrown over him. Another testified to locations, to names, to who gave the orders. The net tightened. Within weeks, arrests followed. 2 men became the focus of the prosecution: William Farrell, considered a ringleader in the murders, and Benjamin Tapner, one of the men who had carried out the torture. The legal strategy was crucial. These men were not charged as smugglers. Smuggling carried fines, not gallows. They were charged with murder. The trials would be held at the assizes, where juries were drawn from outside the local area, where intimidation was harder. Confession became currency. Several gang members turned witness in exchange for clemency. They described the barn, the well, the grave. The details were specific, corroborated, and damning. The investigation moved quickly once witnesses began to talk. Farrell and Tapner were arrested within weeks of the murders. Others followed. The authorities recovered both bodies. Galley's corpse was pulled from the well. Chater's remains were found in the woods. Both bore injuries consistent with the witness testimony: broken bones, ligature marks, evidence of prolonged violence. The physical evidence matched the accounts. The timeline held. The case was solid. But the Crown wanted more than convictions. They wanted examples. The prosecutor made it clear this was not only about justice for 2 murdered men, it was about breaking the gang's grip on their coast. The trials would be public, the verdicts would be definitive, and the punishments would be visible. By January 1749, the accused were brought to the Sussex and Surrey assizes. The courtrooms were packed. The Gentleman's Magazine covered the proceedings. Broadsides circulated with details of the murders. The public was watching. The prosecution's case rested on witness testimony and the bodies themselves. Former gang members described the abduction step by step. They named who gave orders, who carried them out, who helped dispose of the bodies. One witness testified that Galley was dragged by the horse until the flesh tore from his bones. Another described how Chater's voice grew weaker as the earth was shoveled over him. The defense attempted to challenge credibility. These were criminals, they argued. Men buying their freedom with accusations. Could such testimony be trusted? The prosecution countered with corroboration. Multiple witnesses, independent of one another, described the same events in the same sequence. The bodies matched the testimony. The timeline was airtight. The juries deliberated briefly. William Farrell, guilty of murder. Benjamin Tapner, guilty of murder. Others followed. The sentence was read in full, and then the clause the court wanted everyone to hear: not just death. A sentence meant to remain visible. The body to be hung in chains. If you've stayed with me this far, there are more case files waiting here. The condemned were given days to prepare. Some confessed, some prayed, some remained silent. On March 23, 1749, the executions began. The scaffolds were erected at key locations, not hidden but placed where crowds could gather. Reports suggest thousands attended. Execution was spectacle. The hangings were swift, the drop, the snap. The body left to swing until death was confirmed by the attending officials. Then the second sentence began. The corpses were taken down, measured, and fitted into iron cages. These were not standard issue. They were custom-made, shaped to the body, designed to hold the skeleton intact as decomposition progressed. The cages were hoisted onto tall posts and secured with chains. The locations were deliberate. Farrell's body was displayed near the site of Galley's torture. Tapner's cage hung along the road to Chichester, the route Galley and Chater had been traveling when intercepted. Others were placed along the coast, visible from the water. The message was unmistakable. This will happen if you kill to protect your trade, and it will not end with death. The gibbet stood for months. The cages were designed to outlast the bodies. Iron resists rot, flesh does not. Within weeks, the smell was noted in contemporary accounts. Decomposition in open air announces itself. Some villagers avoided the sites out of fear, superstition, or disgust. Others visited deliberately to confirm the gang was truly broken. Sailors reported seeing the cages from offshore. Travelers noted them in journals. Children were warned to stay away, though some approached close enough to see what remained. The state did not remove the bodies. That was the point. The punishment was designed to last, to outlive memory, to mark the landscape itself with consequence. Gibbeting was not new. It had precedent in English law, particularly for pirates and those who committed violence on the roads or at sea, but it was rare. It required official sanction. It was reserved for crimes that demanded public memory. Contemporary accounts describe the reaction as mixed. Some saw it as justice. Others saw it as cruelty that exceeded necessity. But no one ignored it. The bodies remained until nature claimed them. When the bones finally fell, the cages stayed. Some were eventually taken down, others rusted in place, empty, still marking where the gang had ruled. The coastline became evidence. The Hawkhurst Gang collapsed. Smuggling did not end, profit margins remained high, and the coast was still long. But the gang's myth of invincibility was broken. Organization and violence could not shield criminals from the state indefinitely. The surviving members scattered. Some fled to France, some disappeared. A few were arrested later on unrelated charges, but the gang as a cohesive force was finished. The broader impact was legislative. The government, recognizing that enforcement alone could not stop smuggling, began reducing import duties in the 1750s. Lower tariffs made smuggling less profitable. Economic reform proved more effective than terror, but the gibbets left a different kind of legacy. They demonstrated that punishment was communication. The state wanted the living to feel something when they saw those cages: fear, respect for law, a reminder that some crimes would be remembered long after the criminal was dead. Execution is a moment. Gibbeting is a condition. The Hawkhurst case became a reference point. When later criminals were gibbeted, highwaymen, murderers, mutineers, the precedent was often cited. The scale of their punishment set a standard. And the question it raises is not whether the punishment was legal. It clearly was. The question is what kind of society chooses to continue punishment after death, and what that choice reveals about power, fear, and control. The Hawkhurst Gang remains infamous not because of what they smuggled, but because of how they protected their trade, and how publicly the state punished them in return. Their story reminds us that the line between enforcement and terror is often drawn not by morality, but by power and the willingness to make examples of the dead. The gibbets are gone now. The cages rusted away centuries ago, but the records remain. Trial transcripts, witness testimony, contemporary accounts. And those records tell us what the state wanted us to remember. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing to The Darkest Archives. We uncover forgotten crimes, examine historical trials, and explore the darker corners of justice and consequence. New episodes are released weekly. They killed to silence witnesses, and when the law finally reached them, it didn't just take their lives, it displayed them in iron and decay until the wind finished the work. Next time, another punishment that didn't end at death because the body was only the beginning. Until next time.